Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Jonathan. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Tom. Thanks. I'm Jonathan Orpin. I'm the founder and CEO of New Energy Works and Pioneer Millworks. We're a 100% employee-owned company out of both New York State and Oregon in the U.S. And we do a number of things. We're a timber frame company, a heavy timber construction. We're a general contractor, an architecture firm, a millwork company specializing in reclaimed and sustainably harvested wood. And we do high performance enclosures. So what we call HPEZ, or making high performance easier. So we're doing all sorts of things. We do them on both coasts. And as I was mentioning to you, Tom, earlier, it's a bit chaotic at times because we do so many things. But our drivers tend to be wood. We're wood people for all sorts of beauty, ecologic, and craft reasons, and environmental stewardship. So those tend to be our drivers as a company. We're about 160 people, again, spread out over a variety of different working centers and both coasts.
Sure. And you have a strong focus, Jonathan, on sustainability, right?
Yeah, New Energy Works started quite a number of decades ago in my personal desire to bring more environmentally sound building technology forward. I certainly wasn't doing it alone. That was in the early 80s when the solar energy industry was coming about, and people were being really sensitive to the oil embargo by OPEC way back in the late 70s, and the fact that it was time to start looking at our environmental impact on the planet. And I was just part of that. And so to do that through business made sense to me, as a genetically predisposed entrepreneur.
Sure. And how do you ensure that your supply chain aligns with your sustainability goals?
Yeah, it's hard. It takes a lot of research, Tom, honestly. And sometimes it takes a certain amount of biting the bullet, as you might say. So for instance, most of our wood, as an example, is certified by a third party, either Forest Stewardship Council certification, which is an internationally known third party forestry and chain of custody certifier, or it's its competitor, the PEFC, which is the program of environmental forestry something. Sorry, I'm not really sure what PEFC stands for. We've just become involved with it in the last few years. And I think it's more oriented. The Europeans actually use it more than the Americans do, but a significant amount of our wood comes from Canada, and it's PEFC certified. So we're pretty excited about both of those. So those make us feel good. And as a big one, the other one is always looking at what is the carbon impact of the materials we use, which is really hard. And so, for instance, we've now made the switch over from insulation from petroleum-based products to wood-based insulation products. I don't know if you can believe that. And Europe has led the way on this for decades. Wood fiber insulation represents, maybe 20%, 30% of the European market, where it really has just been introduced here in the last half dozen years in the States. And what that is basically it's forest products chewed up and recomposed into either loose fill insulation or rigid insulation. And we've been importing rigid insulation from Poland and Germany for the last half dozen years. And love it. It really sits well with our ethos, as well as we like working with it. Honestly, it's not itchy or anything like that. And the forest that it comes from is Forest Stewardship certified or wood industry byproducts, which is just brilliant. Here's the exciting news, and that is that the United States just opened its first wood fiber insulation plant out of Maine, which is way up in the upper right-hand corner of the States, the continental United States. It's called Timber HP. And so we are now finally able to get domestic sourced wood fiber products. And we'll soon, in about a couple more years, have a similar plant on the West Coast. So we'll be able to cover the whole country with wood fiber insulation. The cool news about this is that in the digital age, the amount of paper that's being used has really declined tremendously. And while people have different opinions about the pulp industry, and in fact, the pulp industry does have a checkered past when it comes to leaving a mess behind it as it chews up trees and into pulp, into paper. It nonetheless did do a couple of good things. And one of them was to take lower grade wood products out of the forest, which theoretically can help us manage those forests better against things like forest fire, et cetera.
Sure.
The other thing it does is creates a lot of jobs. Well, in Maine, for instance, the pulp industry has been decimated, and because people aren't buying as much paper anymore, among other reasons, but certainly that's the main one. And so this is a perfect filler in that market segment
No pun intended.
to create wood fiber. So those are pretty exciting areas that we're working hard on and leading the pack, so to speak, in supply chain, a thoughtful, sustainable supply chain.
Just out of sheer ignorance on my part, would that filler, that wood fiber filler, would that be a fire hazard? Obviously not, or you wouldn't be using it, but how do you make sure that it's not?
Yeah, so there's a borate additive that does two things. It controls the fire spread. So this, you can well imagine that we're highly regulated in items like fire spread. I live on the west coast of the U.S., and fires here are a real issue year after year.
Yeah.
And now even on the East Coast with it seemed like it's not true, but half of Canada burning this last summer.
Yeah.
We had smoke all the way down to North Carolina, and it was eye-opening for many people. So we're really regulated to make sure that all of these testing and fire spread and smoke spread analyses are passed and created. And so borate is the main anti-flammable situation. And borate's a natural occurring mineral.
Okay. Straightforward enough. Cool. That's good. Good. What would be some of the biggest challenges you've faced when, integrating eco-friendly practices into your supply chain, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'd love to say we've overcome them all, but as you can imagine, it's an ongoing thing.
Sure.
2 steps forward, 1.5 step back.
Yeah.
That old dance.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of struggles when it comes to pushing new technology or new information. And gosh, I'm sure that with all of your good quality people who get on your show, you've heard a lot of them. For us, there's the basic one is finances. A lot of times when you're a niche player, things don't come in as inexpensive as maybe the monster players are. As an example, fiberglass. Let's use fiberglass. I pick on fiberglass all the time. I love to pick on fiberglass because it sucks as an insulation.
Yeah.
And yet it has controlled the American market, maybe the European too. I don't know. The American forever. I mean, it's controlled it. It's cheap. It's made in unbelievably large quantities. And yet it doesn't do a great job. It doesn't breathe very well. It takes a lot of carbon input to create. You can't recycle the stuff. It just is terrible. In 1986, there's a Saskatchewan House study by the Canadians, and the first thing they said was, fiberglass makes a great filter. It makes a terrible insulation. But nonetheless, that industry was so powerful and so big, it continued and continues to control much of the insulation market. So that's an example where we're up against, the David and Goliath thing. However, people are learning and more. Used to be years ago, I would say, I know you're coming to us because we build gorgeous products and homes, but you're going to get the most sustainable and energy efficient home you can imagine, whether you want it or not. And they would laugh. I would laugh, but then we would actually do it. Now that's less so. People are so much more sensitive. I mean, anybody who's still denying climate change is living under a rock. And, all of our clients, know that. And so they're very open to that. Not perfectly. I mean, we're still fighting some code issues. We're still fighting finances. We're still fighting big industry. The worst example, and I mean even worse than fiberglass, is closed cell spray and place polyurethane foam. I mean, its global warming potential, or GWP, is thousands and thousands and thousands of times greater than some of your better alternatives, well, like wood fiber as an example, but also cellulose and others. And yet, the construction industry the polyurethane industry has combined with the construction industry to create a behemoth of it just is easy. So maybe the answer to your question of what we fight worse is easy. Because sometimes
Nice.
doing the right
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
is not the easiest thing.
Sure. Sure. No, of course. Of course. And it's interesting that you brought up climate change, because obviously that is having huge impacts. So, what kind of strategies do you implement to future-proof your supply chain against the increasing unpredictability of global climate patterns?
Tom, are you asking from a business standpoint to make sure we still have product? Is that one of the things that you're asking? I'm
That's part of it, yeah.
sure. So part of it is investing in the domestic manufacture of wood fiber insulation, as I described. I mean, we're an early investor and large promoter and brand ambassador of Timber HP. timberhp.com. So there's that. In the wood product area, the one thing that's wonderful about wood is doesn't matter what anybody says, the trees grow. And by us using them, we're sequestering carbon. We're using a product that is the lowest carbon equivalent input in the manufacturing process. So in that way, it's that old story, if we do good, we will do well. And so
Yeah.
by really focusing on products that we believe in, we also, coincidentally or not, are actually using products that I think self-future proof in a way. But it doesn't mean we don't have to push it along a little bit, with wood siding. For instance, one of our largest products is wood siding. And it's we're up against vinyl siding, and we're up against reinforced concrete siding. And,
Sure.
both, actually, not both of them. There's no excuse for vinyl siding, but for wood, concrete reinforced siding, there's an argument for that. It'll last forever. It really is no upkeep pretty much, and it's aggressive in that way, and it comes into the market pretty inexpensively. The downside is the carbon equivalents to create it are off the chart. So for it to be called green, I think is greenwashing. Doesn't mean I don't think it's a reasonable product. I just don't call it green, And so for us, a wood product that is low carbon inputs to, low carbon footprint to create. Usually it's reasonably local because trees grow local to our shops. It's a really good sense of cradle to cradle. You can, if you can't recycle it, at the very least you can do is chew it up and use it for mulch or something. I mean, as a silly example, but it is, it can be a little more expensive than the massivity of the creation of some of those other products, and it's also takes a little more upkeep. So we're up against that there, but nonetheless, there will always be wood siding around, and so that's as an example. I mean, Tom, the thread here that is consistent is we're wood people. So apologies for always coming back to that, but we are wood people for lots of good reasons: craft, beauty, and sustainability.
That's a beautiful product. There's no reason to apologize for that. Tell me though, does technology play a role in your company's sustainable practices?
Oh yeah. You might have heard that at times there's a difficulty in finding highly skilled craftspeople. You might have heard that because it's really true. And so for us, we're not sitting here with just a chisel, although we certainly do use hand tools. All of our shops are outfitted with CNC equipment, and we're always looking forward at our capital expenditures. We're struggling right now with probably wanting more investment than our cash flow can carry, and so do we go into debt to achieve some of these goals? Because Some of this improvement, of course, does exactly what we want it to do, which is to make our products more attainable for more people. If our high performance enclosures, for instance, are called HPEZ, high performance made easier, well, it also needs to be more affordable or more available in quantity, those sorts of things. So by relying on technology, and usually that's a CNC based technology, we are working forward to we're looking forward to making that work.
Nice. And you mentioned as well the fact that you're an employee-owned organization. Why did you shift to that? Because I know that's a recent shift. So why did you shift to that? And has that impacted on your supply chain management in any way?
Yeah, you used the word future-proof on our materials recently, but perhaps this is even more future-proofing. I'm aging out at some point. My wife would like me to retire about 5 years ago. I'm still going strong, working about as hard as I ever have. But the reality is I'm not going to work forever. And there's a second generation of my coworkers who are amazing. But what does that mean when I was to age out? Because I'm the founder and used to be the sole owner. And what does that mean when I leave? You can leave a company in 3, maybe 4 different ways. One of them is in a box leaving a mess behind you. Another is to find a VC or other buyer, a venture capitalist or other buyer who comes in from the outside. And the truth is the math isn't really good for that. They come in with a heavy debt load on their balance sheet and they want their return on investment. So that can leave a mess, particularly in a kind of a quirky, spread out, mission-driven company like ours. And then the third is find a way that the people who have helped you build this company can carry on as the new set of owners. And there's a few different ways to do that. One is just phantom stock or other stock options for limited number of management staff, et cetera, et cetera. But in the U.S., we have an amazing, and as far as I know, it's only in the U.S., but one of your listeners might be able to correct us. As far as I know, the U.S. is the only place that has what's called an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP. And it's a method of using a tax-protected entity called an ESOP to buy out ownership in the name of the employees. So the employees become owners. I now have, I like to say, 150 partners in some ways. Now, of course, don't ever forget that there's a line drawn between management and ownership. But these are folks now who finally have a real stake in it. We've always had sort of an ownership mentality, but an ownership mentality, when you take that to the grocery store, it does not actually buy you food. Whereas the value and the shared earnings, the shared profits of that does. So in some ways, in its simplest form, an ESOP is just an extra retirement plan, because when you retire or leave, you cash in a certain number of shares that you have earned through time and earnings. And depending upon how the company does, the better the company does, the better the value of your shares. And so you are now, if before you really cared, now you really care on a much more visceral and personally, financially responsible way. So it's a powerful, powerful tool of employee ownership. You live in Spain, don't you? Northern Spain has the most amazing employee-owned system, the Madrigan work co-ops in northern Spain is unbelievable, and it's people caring about, their workplace, generations of owners. It's in that example, it's not really an ESOP, but it's probably similar, the Madrigans. And there's various different industries, and it's all tied together in this interweb of ownership. And it's proven over and over again, at least in the U.S. in the data that I've looked at, that employee-owned companies have more resiliency in difficult times. Their people retire with much more money in their account. They care about their communities more. In my case, I was bought out by this ESOP, and I probably could have done better in the open market, but it was fine. I mean, it was really fine. And now I've got all of these people many who have been with me for decades, now becoming owners.
Mm.
And I don't, it has nothing to do with socialism or any bullshit like that. It's it has to do with classic capitalist thought processes, and in the U.S. where nobody agrees with anybody down in Washington D.C. on either side of the
Mm.
aisle. This is one of the few bipartisan supported programs because on the right they understand it's a powerful capitalistic tool because employee ownership is powerful, it's more successful, and on the left it's the democratization of the workplace. So it's this wonderful mix of both philosophy and practicality that has worked. So, long-winded answer to why we became
Sure.
employee-owned, but it's amazing,
And
and I'm so proud of my coworkers for earning it, and I am so psyched to be able to offer that.
just from a practical perspective, do the employees, I mean, if they own it, they obviously had to buy it, so they had to cough up money to get there. Did that present any challenges?
So in the ESOP, that's not the case. So the ESOP
Ah,
process allows the previous ownership to be bought out using a tax protected entity. So in some ways, I'll just say this, we're a little like a church. We have tax protections to do this process. And then with those a combination of tax protections and profits and equity, that's what actually had bought me out.
okay.
The individual people in the company paid nothing, which of course, makes you think, oh, well, if they paid nothing, then what do they care? But they earn it over time, and that earnings is a direct reflection on the value as valued by a third party independent valuation company of the value of the company, which then affects the value of their shares. So they can see an immediate year after year growth or not of the value of their stake in the company. So they didn't actually, in an ESOP, they didn't actually pay anything.
Interesting. Interesting. And have you seen any kind of sense of ownership among the employees? Has it influenced the way that, they've worked for the company, they've managed relationships with suppliers, anything like that?
I don't know.
Okay.
One of the things I said is we've always had kind of an ownership mentality. I mean, I live in Oregon, which is, whatever, 3,000 miles away from New York, and I've lived here for 15 years, and yet both coasts seem to operate well. In some areas, the New York has operated even better than where I am. That doesn't reflect well on me, but that's just the way it is. And so I've always said we've had an ownership mentality, and we're reasonably new here. We think that it's true, and certainly anecdotally, I've been told by people from my carpenters have been with me for a long time, to even people who pull nails out of reclaimed wood, how much they appreciate it. We're an open book company. We've been an open book company for decades, so people understand. I've always taught them what business is and where the money comes from and where it goes. So I have nothing to be ashamed of or to hide, bad or good.
Nice.
When things are bad, I believe people want to
Mm.
help, and when things are good, I want to share. So, for people who are in business who don't have those basic philosophies, mine might not be their path. But it has worked for us pretty well, I think, and as I say, I've done well, and I think our people now have the chance to do better than they otherwise would.
Sure.
So, but one of the things I say over and over again is this ownership thing is not some tricky tool or manipulation by management to make you work harder. It's actually just an acknowledgement of what you've already earned. And I think that's sort of that I think lands on fertile ground in people's heart.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What lessons would you say you've learned in sustainable business that you'd consider most valuable for, people listening to the show, who are the majority of whom would be supply chain professionals and or students and academics?
So, Tom, do you have another hour?
We have another 7 minutes, 6.5.
Yeah. I'm not sure so as an entrepreneur, there was a book written a couple decades ago. It's called The E-Myth. And whoever wrote the book was their premise was that entrepreneurs really don't take risks. They really are all calculated out carefully, blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure that author never was an entrepreneur. I think a couple of things. One is, don't be afraid to work hard. Don't be particularly greedy. Build from the heart, and you'll get better people around you, and your clients will be better.
Sure.
So some of those things. I'd love to say follow your instincts, but since my instincts have led me into all sorts of brick walls over and over again, I think I should say follow your instincts if they're better than mine. But we're doing all right. So again, in our little niches, we're sort of top of class, but they're little niches. And maybe that's even something there. Pick your markets carefully.
Sure. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Jonathan. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
The things that drive me on a day-to-day basis are, again, the things we've covered, sustainable building, beautiful craft, democratization of the workplace. So those things I think we've covered pretty thoroughly. So nothing really comes to mind, frankly. Sorry, Tom.
No, that's great. That means we did a good job. Fantastic. Super. Jonathan, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we touched on in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So our website is newenergyworks.com, all one word. And that covers our design build part of the business, the sort of the service-oriented part of the business. And then pioneermillworks.com is the reclaimed and sustainably harvested wood milling company. And we do siding and flooring and paneling and all sorts of, funny sort of off-normal products there. One of our big ones is Shosugibon, which is a charred wood siding that has really, really taken off. I think it's become our single number one product right now. So, those two websites will tell you a whole lot, and love to talk to anybody. Any of your listeners too who just want to chat about business. I've started up I'm part of, on the East Coast, a group there that's focused on mission-driven companies, triple bottom line companies, the triple bottom line being people, planet, and profit. All of those are equal legs in a stool. And I'm part of starting up a new network out on the West Coast, young entrepreneurs who care, but who could use a little bit of more mentorship in a group setting for mission-driven companies. So I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff. And I'm Jonathan at newenergyworks.com, and that's Jonathan. I know there's all sorts of ways to spell it, but mine's the right way.
I'll put the links in the show notes, Jonathan.
Okay,
great. That's been really, really interesting, Jonathan. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Tom, thanks for all that you do.